evening. I'd like to welcome everyone here to the MAP panel. Today we're going to be discussing medically assisted treatment. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists to you. Each panelist is then going to go through a little talk on their perspective of what MAP means to them. So if you have any questions, you can write it down on the note cards, or feel free at the end, we'll take questions and you can ask your question then, all right? So first we have Dr. Zach Hansen from CORAT on the end here. We have Dr. Stephen Young, he's a professor of criminology here at Marshall. We have Judge Greg Howard, and we have Dr. Kim White, who is in the social work department. Okay, so we're going to start with Dr. Hansen, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about MAP.
Hello, thanks everybody for coming. I started working sort of in a MAP program about 9 years ago with Valley Health, where it was called an FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center. And so we sort of are geared towards patients that have Medicaid and Medicare. And did it just because I realized there was a problem and wanted to be a part of the solution. Started off with 10 patients, and then as the years sort of went by, you know, sort of got larger and larger. We have about 150 patients that I have, and then it's sort of grown the program. And so we started an effort called PROACT about 2 years ago. And sort of two reasons led to that. One is realize that there was a lot of small silos around Huntington, all providing MAP services. But that's all we were doing, was providing MAP services, because no program was necessarily large enough to really add in other ancillary services to that. And so sort of said, well, what would it look like if we started to work together and we sort of pooled our resources to be able to offer other things? The other aspect of it was we were probably never going to be able to recruit addictionologists or someone who's fellowship trained or someone to really come in and treat a large number of patients. You know, federal regulations allow up to 275, and that probably was never going to happen. So we started saying, well, what can we do to start getting regular primary care doctors to be a part of the solution and give a little bit of their time, not necessarily all of their time, but a little bit of their time to start sort of building up a program. And so we got Kathy and St. Mary's sort of on board to sort of put the seed money in, and we bought the old CVS building on 20th Street, and we sort of remodeled it. And so now we have this location where other providers can come and sort of work, and then we provide all the sort of wraparound care that they may need. And so we have myself, we've got a family practice doctor from Marshall, we've got an internal medicine doctor from Marshall, we have 2 ER doctors from St. Mary's, and potentially a psychiatrist from a different agency that may be coming in the future, and then a neonatologist who may be joining our practice here in the next couple weeks. And so these individuals will come, work a half day, sort of see their patients, and we have the nurse there, we have the lab there, we've got case management services, and we have all the other sort of services that they may need to be able to provide a good, high-quality sort of care. So what MAP services really is you have the medical aspect of it, which is the medication. We primarily do buprenorphine, which is Suboxone, Subutex. We also do some Vivitrol, although we don't have a real large Vivitrol patient population. We have therapists on site, and so everybody does group therapy weekly. And we usually try the med management and group therapy go side by side, and then individual therapy is every other week on average, usually 2 sessions a month. We do on-site drug screens to not only make sure that they're taking the medicine that they're prescribed, but also check for any illicits. We have a case manager, which helps with all scheduling of the appointments. We'll help get medical cards. We can help them find housing. We've got a vocational specialist that is coming on board, and we'll start creating relationships with local employers so that we can get individuals maybe back to work, help them get GEDs, sort of further their education from that standpoint. We've got someone from St. Mary's who does spiritual care, and so on the intake, the patient says, you know, spirituality is an important aspect of my recovery, that we can sort of, work through that. And then we have 2 recovery coaches. So some patients just sort of respond better to someone who's been there, done that, and that's not something, that either myself or a lot of the other providers, either therapy or medical, are sort of able to do. with the treatment. And so we really want to try to wrap around and provide all sort of levels of care. And then hopefully in the next month or two, we're going to start with an IOP program, or intensive outpatient program. And for those individuals that are struggling and need more contact, then they could come, and we'll do 9 to 10 hours of therapy a week, which is more than the 1.5 that they're sort of getting at the current level of care. But that's just sort of a little bit about ProAct and what we're doing and how we're providing care.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson. Dr. Young?
I'm a little bit of the oddball on the group to some extent. I'm really kind of the bridge between these two gentlemen and where the research in criminology is going with regards to MAT. MAT or MAT works with helping individuals dealing with addiction and how we can help individuals dealing with addiction without necessarily getting them caught up and trapped within the criminal justice system and the criminal legal system. First of all, I'm a criminologist. I'm not a CJ guy. So I really am more the study of how societal issues like wealth, income inequality, things like that affect different criminal-like behaviors, criminality in general. And what we're seeing now in the literature coming up through criminology is the importance of using harm reduction, and how harm reduction techniques can help people dealing with addiction make it through these steps, make it through treatment if they need to, and not get caught up and get stuck within the system and get caught within the barriers of the CJ system. And more evidence is coming out at how MAT helps with that, how it is definitely a pillar within harm reduction to help individuals kind of get over that hump. So what I'm going to really do today is just give a brief idea of what criminological literature is saying, but I really am here more for the discussion afterwards, so people can talk about this and what the literature is saying and how everything kind of ties together. But what we are seeing in criminology now is kind of this debate on where the legal system and almost the medical, more treatment-based system should meet, or where they should kind of lead each other. So I know, Judge Howard, you want to talk about the drug court and everything like that. With the large literature, there is more and more evidence showing that we should move away from the legal system as much as we can. I'm not saying the drug courts are bad, it's not working, I'm not picking on you by any means, but the literature is showing how we need to start moving in a direction towards community health, towards this, again, this harm reduction idea, and using harm reduction to help these individuals. So as we kind of start this conversation and continue, I can feed into that a little bit. What we're seeing in this area specifically is the need for more and more harm reduction with regards to resources for harm reduction. There is a lot of need for the economic factors behind that, and there's a lot of need for things like transportation for individuals going through this. There's a lot of need for more individual care, if you're talking more intensive individual care. And that's something that I can kind of bring to the table with how other areas are using this and bring it into how we can use it in West Virginia and specifically Appalachia as a whole. So that's what I'll be doing tonight as we kind of get going.
Thank you, Dr. Young. Judge Howard?
Okay, so I'm one of the circuit judges here in Capital County, and as part of my job, I handle criminal civil cases, but as part of my job, I have taken on the adult drug court here in Capital County. Fortunately or unfortunately, we have the largest drug court in the state. We have about 50 participants in that drug court, anywhere between 50 and 60 on any given day. You may have seen an article in the Herald Dispatch today about a graduation that we had yesterday. It was a nice ceremony. One of our people graduated drug court and has come a long way and is really a true success story. He is not someone who used MAT, but my perspective on MAT is, and I actually just had about an hour-long conversation before I came over here with one of my probation officers about Matt and what we are, his name's Matt actually, but about Matt and what we are, how we are evolving, how our thought processes are evolving. This is, and like you said, you're not picking on the criminal justice system. It's, the only reason we're involved is because people have committed crimes, so we're kind of forced into that, and we don't really have a choice. So we're dealing with people who have committed crimes, they've come into our jurisdiction, and so now people who have done this and they're nonviolent and we can identify the problem as mainly drugs. We're trying everything we can to assist them, to rehabilitate them, get them back on the street as productive citizens. And my thought process on MAT is, over the last 20 years, like I said, now in recent years, it's kind of accelerated. I came up in the practice of law where judges, old school judges, basically said, if your clients are on Suboxone or your clients are on Vivitrol or whatever it is, they're not getting their kids back, they're not gonna be on probation, you gotta get off all that stuff. So that's kind of what I came up in practicing law and advising my clients. Now, the recent years, we're all being trained as judges that MAT is very useful, that the research, as Dr. Young just said, more and more evidence is coming out. It's still coming out. And so we're learning every day, every month, how to best use this in the criminal justice system. And Dr. Hanson and I actually are part of a group we just met last week, and we're working on rolling out more medication-assisted treatment to people in our criminal justice system. We're working with PROACT and with a couple of other agencies, and we're going to make this a little more accessible and readily usable. I'll give you an idea. Out of the 50-plus people we have in drug court right now, there are about 6 participants out of that 50 that are on medication-assisted treatment. They're all on Vivitrol out of those 6. And the reason that, and I'll wrap up here, but as the discussion goes on, the reason we prefer Vivitrol in the criminal justice system is because it's injectable and we don't have to worry about diversion like we do with Suboxone and strips and any of those other kind of substances where you take a group of people and put them in a compact area, work them in a program together, and then you introduce things that they can distribute amongst themselves or sell. It's a problem. So we prefer Vivitrol, or hopefully soon injectable Suboxone. I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight. That's a big goal of ours. So the people that we are seeing on it, we're having some great success. I do have a recent failure that I'm actually dealing with tomorrow morning on Vivitrol that I'm sure I'll talk about a little bit tonight at some point. But that's kind of an overview of where we are in the criminal justice system. We're evolving and we're using MAT more and more.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. White?
Thanks, everybody, for being here. My interest in researching, I just completed my dissertation where I interviewed 6 local physicians, Dr. Hanson being one of them, on the process of prescribing MAT to patients. And as a social worker, this was interesting to me because I wanted to, there's so much stigma still, even though we're evolving in our thought process around MAT, there's still a lot of stigma around the practice. And so I wanted to look at MAT from a strengths-based perspective, which is, the lens that social workers tend to view their clients and colleagues through. So that strengths-based perspective was very important. I feel like it was an area that often gets overlooked when we focus a lot on pathology. We don't often pay much attention to potential. So I wanted to see what was appealing to these doctors and why they would take on this practice with these stigmatized patients and a practice that is sometimes stigmatized. So my interest in researching the perspectives of doctors originates from a desire to understand the motivation of doctors to treat a stigmatized population using a stigmatized method. The World Health Organization in 2009 issued a report stating that medication-assisted treatments such as methadone and buprenorphine reduce the cycle of intoxication and withdrawal and reduce the risk of criminal activity, transmission of HIV and Hep C through contaminated needles, and overdose death when compared to detoxification and abstinence programs, which can be kind of a controversial statement in a recovery landscape that is dominated by abstinence-based programs. And as social workers, we believe in self-determination of the client, meaning abstinence-based programming is an absolute, should be an absolute option for people whose cultural traditions and upbringing and worldview meshes with the worldview of the abstinence-based programs. But there are some people for which abstinence-based programming doesn't fit. And sometimes when people enter into abstinence-based programming, it often takes maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times to relapse, And by that point, somebody could have lost their children, custody of their children, they may have acquired Hep C, they may have lost their job. So I'm based on the research that I did with these doctors, I'm a strong proponent of MAT in primary care and in the emergency room. So I'll continue on here. In spite of empirical evidence supporting the practice and the widespread use of medication-assisted therapies in other parts of the country and across the globe, medication-assisted treatment is difficult to access in West Virginia. We're rolling it out big time here in Huntington and grateful for that, but in other remote parts of the state, there's still a tremendous amount of stigma around this practice. It's just a pill mill, you're giving a drug for a drug kinds of attitudes that really get in the way of people's change opportunities. Numerous studies have demonstrated MAT's efficacy in retaining people in treatment and demonstrating significant reductions in the biopsychosocial symptoms of addiction that include risk for overdose death, disease, cravings and withdrawal symptoms, and then the social symptoms that accompany drug use, incarceration, unemployment, family dissolution, exposure to trauma, child protective service involvement with the family. A review of literature reveals many physicians, and let me just put a disclaimer on this before I say, I don't know that this is the case here, although some of the physicians that I interviewed stated that they did not learn how to do a proper assessment and a proper history of a person with addiction. They're not comfortable asking those questions a lot of times, aren't familiar with the comorbidity of addiction, that often there's a mental health problem associated with the addiction, there's a history of trauma, and physicians who are often short on time, and maybe don't have the training for building that rapport to be able to ask those questions. That's a big obstacle, and that's an area for improvement in medical school curriculum and in social work curriculum, because the social workers, we can be the behavioral health consultants on the treatment team, and we can advise people on how to build that rapport and how to do those assessments and how to ask those questions and really get to a place where you have a trusting relationship and a time investment in that client, because really that's the research that I did, that's what if I was to boil it down, it really does come down to taking the time to get to know that client and understanding contextual factors that are contributing to their drug use, because it isn't always, the drug isn't always your biggest problem. Often it's the behaviors that, maintain drug use or whatever it is they're trying to mask with drug use. So demystifying the process and experiences of treating people struggling with addiction may alleviate the stigma associated with the population that characterizes these patients as drug-seeking, manipulative, and immoral. Highlighting practices of reputable doctors who attend to patients with care and concern, whose actions are directed through adherence to policy and consideration of empirical evidence, and result in improved health outcomes for patients, may inform medical school curriculum throughout the region. The answer to the so what question pertinent to my research is consistent with social work values of doing what works, not getting too much into the weeds of, is this a moral issue? Is this morally the correct way to go about treating these people? We're at a point right now where it's what works? So, and that's pragmatism, another social work framework, getting to what works. So the so what question is pertinent to my research, is consistent with social work values of doing what works and focusing on strengths rather than deficits to give people options, make change possible, and improve their lives. And so from those 6 interviews, I boiled everything down, all those very long transcribed, 1 hour, I had no idea how much paper 1 hour interview could produce, but it went on forever and ever. And then to try to transcribe, it takes an hour to transcribe 10 minutes of an interview. So I I put in like $700 for transcribing, because I'm like, I'm not going to finish this program if I have to I'll just quit right now. I can't put in another 10 minutes of this. So anyway, boiling down all of the themes, I came to really value, and I could get emotional about it. I did in my dissertation defense when I talked about you doctors. I got a little teary about it because the compassion that came through with these doctors, their motivation to continue because they saw their patients changing. You know, Dr. Hansen said that, you know, a mom comes in with her kid on the first time and she's despondent and totally just distressed and in despair. And then 4 weeks later comes in with her little girl, and the little girl is just raving that mommy's better now. So to boil it down, that's what these docs said kept them going, keeps them going. What's attractive about MAT to them is, you know, when you go into medicine, you go into medicine to help people and get good outcomes, and they're getting good outcomes with MAT.
So we, okay, so we're going to open it up for questions now. So is there anyone who has questions for the panel in general or for a specific panelist? Okay.
How important has integrated care been for like the success of your patients at ProAct? Like, would you see success in just Matt without all the other social support that you're building around them?
I've been very fortunate that I've always been able to have a fairly integrated model. So it's hard for me to sort of speak of how it used to be, but I think the reality is it makes a world of difference. I mean, because, you know, I was talking with our program administrator as I was walking in, and she's coming back from a conference, you know, and what they were saying, and a lot of people who were really smart were saying, if you don't change the home environment, if you don't change the social determinants that this patient is experiencing, no amount of therapy, no amount of medicine is going to turn that patient around. Because if they live with someone else who's using, if they have complete and utter hopelessness, then not to say that they're a lost cause, you know, we get miracles every once in a while, but it is so hard. I mean, if you could pluck them up and give them a nice place to live and give them a job and surround them with people who would support them and love them and encourage them, maybe they, you know, you wouldn't necessarily have to deal with, you know, the trauma or the things that have happened to them. You know, it's of vital importance. It really is.
I have a question for Dr. White.
Yes.
In your research, when your docs, did you have some docs that only took cash, or did they all take?
I had one doc who only took cash, and
What was that experience? I'm just curious.
well, it's interesting because there's a lot of stigma around that practice.
Right.
So this individual I met through my husband. He came in, this Dr. Knapp, who all the doctors were willing to be named in the report. So that's really important too, I think, is just the confidence in what they're doing and the educational value, you know, knowing who's doing what. But Dr. Knapp came and gave us a presentation to my husband's drug war class. And he came home raving to me about Dr. Knapp. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go check this guy out and see what it's about. Because, you know, my curiosity ran high when I found out that he's taking only cash. So I called him up and I went to his practice in Boone County. And he's on the place where he has his clinic is on this super curvy road. Like, it's right on the curve. Like, here's the curve and like here's their clinic. Like, it's like a death wish, you know, pulling in there. There's no lighting. Wrought iron bars. It was a very scary place. But I walked in and there were all these people gathered around, you know, And so I went, and then he saw that I was there, so he brought me back, and we chatted for quite a long while. And I learned that he is also a physician at Boone Memorial Hospital, and had been invited, well, not really invited, but he was the newbie on the block at the hospital, and they're like, we're starting an MAT clinic, and you're the guy who's going to do it within the hospital. And he will admit to you that he knew nothing about MAT, nothing, like really didn't know much about addiction either. So, set to Googling.
That's a scholarly source.
Yeah. And I mean, he admits this because he's like, look, this is the situation that I was in. You know, I really didn't have a choice. They told me I was going to do MAT. So not only was he now the MAT guy, he was getting kind of like the stink raised eyebrow from his colleagues, other doctors who were like, oh, he's that guy. He's doing that. And he's like, whatever, you know, I'll just carry on. Well, one evening, they were having a board meeting at the hospital, and here come the state police. And the state police was the city councilman, who said to the hospital board, if you open up this clinic, and if you pursue this, we will sue you, because we don't want your MAT clinic within city limits. So he had invested some time and, you know, energy into this project, and he knew there was a need. So he teamed up with a behavioral health guy who'd been doing it for like 25 years, and they went into the community asking for space. Could they rent some space to open up this clinic? Nobody would rent to them, which is why they ended up on the death-defying curve there in Alum Creek, somewhere on a dark curve. And the person who actually did rent to them was like telling them every day they were praying that they were doing the right thing, because they didn't know for sure if they were doing the right thing by renting this space to them. And so, long story short, his reasoning, he had a lot of reasons for why he doesn't accept, or why he doesn't do Medicaid. And one of them is, you know, you have to have kind of that full-on staff. Like, you have to have the office manager who understands behavioral health and all of the Medicaid policies, and, you know, and maintaining compliance with all of those policies, which is probably a good thing. But he also mentioned that a lot of his clients are kind of under the radar in some ways, like they don't want people to know that they're using MAT. They don't want their employer to know that they're using MAT. They might not want their family members to know that they're using MAT. So they charged a $300 monthly fee and required individual therapy, like once every 2 weeks, I believe it was, and group therapy once every 2 weeks. And he said that he had heard around the way that sometimes, you know, other people who do take Medicaid, and this is just anecdotal, okay, and this is hearsay, really. I mean, that sometimes they'll bump up the price of services in order to, you know, compensate for low reimbursement rates. Lots of attendance and appointments requirements, drug screen mandates, which he does the drug screen too. But he said sometimes all of the bureaucratic aspect of providing the service kind of got in the way of people being able to, or wanting to do the service. So, you know, I have a pretty good radar for, you know, somebody who's untrustworthy or work in the system, and I really did feel like I got the sense from Dr. Knapp that he really is invested in his patients, and he sees them as a whole person, and he's able to take time with them, and he has had lots of success stories as well. So,
Great. Wow, thanks. Interesting.
that's a good question.
Other questions? Yes.
Before you mentioned MAT and the ERs, I just want to know, like, what would that look like, or how would it be implemented, especially with problems in your ERs and how it went working?
Yeah, there was an ER director, I'm not sure exactly where it sort of came from. It came, and I think it's talked at both hospitals sort of about their program. And essentially, what they're able to do is they'll evaluate the patient in the ER, determine sort of that this is an issue. With the regulations, you can prescribe the medicine while they're in the ER, and then patient can theoretically come back the next day and get dosed again. So they can only be dosed out of the ER. You can't prescribe for them to fill at an outside pharmacy. And so they'll recognize them and start them on medicine or do the induction, and then they'll sort of get them into a community clinic, within a couple of days, so that they can start treatment. The problem, that I think that it would be very difficult for us to do that because that provides you would have to have a level of access that is really going to be difficult to get here in Huntington. And we have a couple ER physicians, like I mentioned, that are starting treatment. When we first opened, we were getting patients in within 24 to 48 hours. And then Thanksgiving happened, and Christmas happened, and vacation, and now, it's taking us probably on average about 10 days to get patients in from their initial walk-in, determine they're appropriate for treatment, and then waiting for the medical provider to see them, which is still phenomenal. Before we moved to PROAC, we had a waiting list that was probably 200, 250, and we would pull patients off the waiting list, and at times they were 18 to 24 months that they had been sitting on the list before we actually got around to calling them. So 10 days really isn't that bad, but I think it would be great, but it just, the level of access that you would have to have in order to pull that off. We're very slowly trying to open up doors for access, in our program, but if you look at all the things that Huntington has, you've got the harm reduction program, so they're getting assessed there. We have the QRT program, and so they're going out and assessing all individuals that have overdosed within 48 hours. So we're getting referrals, from there if they're appropriate. We got both hospitals are doing what's called Project Engage, and so they're being assessed in the hospital if they're opioid-related conditions, and they're getting assessed by a specialist and getting started on medicine there, and then referred out. We've got, I'm super excited about the project with drug court, but that's another avenue that's sort of opened up. We've got the moms program, at Cabell, and so if they come in, have a drug-addicted baby or baby that's withdrawing, then they offer them treatment at Cabell, and then those patients sort of move on to an outside resource, which has been PROAC. And so many referral sources, it's hard to keep up. And so it would be great, that the access, there's some estimates, and I haven't heard any recent estimates, but when we first started talking about this concept a couple of years ago, and I started talking to people in the community, there were some people saying there was 8,000 to 12,000 individuals with substance use disorder, in Cabell County. How do you find treatment for 10,000 people? It's so difficult. But we're doing it. The overdose rates are down, the deaths are down 40%. That's phenomenal. Phenomenal. That what we've been able to do in the last 18 to 24 months.
Next question.
How about more collaboration with the medical school? Getting some of these doctors that aren't even aware of substance use disorder and MAT, getting interns and practicums and all of that to build stock.
Yeah, it's coming. The med school has definitely bought in. They have created a substance use disorder sort of curriculum that they're implementing in sort of the clinical the first 2 years. The family practice department has their residents are coming and sort of working with shadowing with me to get exposure. The internal medicine doctor that works at PROAC, she gave a lecture to the residents today, and she brought in one of our patients, And she said she was a hoot. I mean, this lady's hilarious. And she tells it how it is. She's probably 60 years old and, has no filter. And said it was great. The residents were asking questions and she was answering them honestly. And so it's getting there. It just takes time, and it's sort of breaking that stigma. I mean, it really is. And we're also in a place, with the physician workforce in which we need so many doctors. I mean, the need for primary care is so great, that to say, hey, let's stop doing some primary care and come do some addiction medicine. I mean, everyone's overwhelmed with just doing primary care. So it's hard to get their providers to sort of give up their busy practice or make it more busy by shrinking it down by giving time to something else. So it's getting better. It definitely is. It takes time.
I'm curious as to criminology and what's going on with the thinking in criminology.
Well, speaking of, multiple people on the panel have mentioned stigma, and that was something I kind of addressed earlier with the drug court. And when again, I'm not dissing drug court because the drug court does fantastic things and it's very helpful in this process. But when we talk about harm reduction from a criminology perspective, they talk a lot about the idea of diverting before drug court as soon as we can. They talk about things like LEAD, which is law enforcement assisted diversion and things like that, getting them in before they even get into the system at all, getting them into treatment, getting them into MAT. Because there is automatically a stigma with the idea of court, right? We were all speaking up here earlier before and you were talking about you don't go to court for fun. Like that's not a fun thing that you do, right? So there's a stigma with that there. There's also a lot of research coming out in criminology when we look at things with regards to recidivism and issues like that. And it shows that people who are able to get an MAT and other harm reduction-based treatment prior to going to court actually do better. They have a better chance of not caught up in the barriers and things like that later on down the road. Because, I mean, we know, if we look at the criminological literature, CJ as a whole, and I'm a part of this very much by what I do, right? The system is built for a singular purpose, right? We're not built to take care of all these different things. We're built to some degree to be punitive. I mean, that's really what we're here for. I'm not trying to get like Kung Fu Korean or anything on you guys, but that's what we're here for. So when we're talking about criminology and these other aspects within our field, it's how can we address these things, address the social inequalities that are fueling a lot of these things. Like Dr. White said, there's a lot of other contextual factors there that a lot of times are missed that we don't talk about enough. And how can we do that prior to individuals getting into the system and getting caught up and stuck in those barriers the system by just its existence creates for so many people.
So is criminal justice becoming a kinder and gentler?
No. To put it bluntly, no.
I was hoping that.
No, there are people, I will say that there are people in the system that are getting kinder and gentler, not saying that you were ever mean or anything like that, but there are people I'm going to pick on you all day, so just be prepared. No, there are people within the system that are changing their perspectives, changing their views. They're listening to the research and doing this. As a system, and I would argue that as a system in this region, we are not getting kinder. We're not, the system is not. And again, the system, by its nature, is built a certain way. And having to make this colossal change to the way the system functions isn't going to happen overnight. So it's not something it's going to take a long time for that to happen. And it's going to take those people turning into more and more people and teaching and mentoring more and more people to allow that system to do that.
Thank you.
I'm curious about how you guys see this developing the child welfare system. I know a lot of parents lose custody of their children temporarily or their rights are terminated largely due to substance abuse. And so I'm just wondering how you guys have been able to interact with child welfare agencies here, what kind of impact you see this having.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Through the abuse and neglect system, we're inundated with cases in that system. All 4 judges here in Cabell County dedicate almost a full day a week to these cases. And they take all day when we're doing them. And they're tough cases. They're probably the hardest cases I deal with, honestly, because it's easier to send somebody to prison than it is to terminate their parental rights in a lot of cases. Now, you've got a lot of parents that really don't care and they get terminated, but when you have the ones that are leaving the courtroom crying and upset. Those can be kind of heart-wrenching. So, like I mentioned earlier in my opening, the thought process on MAT is evolving in the judicial system. And I think you see it nowhere greater than in CPS cases. Because for years, I would have to tell my clients, you've got to get off of Suboxone. It's not going to work. A lot of them are on it illegally. They weren't even prescribed. They're just getting it off the street. And now, I've been to, the last 2 years, because of my involvement in drug court, I've been to 2 national conferences. And they're preaching that as, you use MAT, it's going to help in these cases. You know, it can be life-changing. And also, don't tell people that you can't do it if a doctor has put them on it, because you're going to run into a lot of problems with federal guidelines, and we're going to end up getting ourselves in trouble. So, so it's kind of funny to watch. I'm sitting in a room with 76 circuit judges from around the state at our local trainings in the state, and you've got a lot of these guys that are older, and they've been barking at respondents in these cases for decades about how you're not going to use that. And now we have people standing in the front of the room lecturing these old judges saying, you can't do that anymore. And they're bucking up and saying, I can still do it. But the reality is they can't, and it's got to change. And it's changed in our circuit. Some of you may have heard of Judge Ferguson, who's 82 and looks younger than me. He's one of those guys that said that for years. You know, you can't be on it. His process has evolved. So all of the judges are evolving in that, and we're seeing in those cases now. I will allow. I can't speak for every judge, but I know because I did kind of an informal survey with our local ones, and they're on board with this more and more. I will allow people to remain on Suboxone or Vivitrol or whatever that is, if it's working and they're taking it properly, and still be able to get their children back through that process. So it's not like it used to be. It's definitely evolving. I think it's a positive. And I will say, I mentioned earlier about a negative. One drawback that I see to it that we have to work on, and I think it comes from all the support that we give people in their homes, family therapy and all of that, and just an overall awareness. I'm going to try to do a better job of it as a judge. When we put somebody on Vivitrol, I've got a case, it's really sad to me because tomorrow I'll be discharging him from drug court. Don't tell him, he doesn't know that. He's unfortunately sitting up at Western Regional right now. But this was a guy who, high school athlete, superstar, ended up in a bad wreck, got on prescription medication, then just started abusing opiates and you name it. And he's got a criminal list as long as my arm, and so we eventually got him into drug court. He's been in prison, we got him in drug court, and after months, we finally got him turned around, and we got him on, and when I tell you I've bent over backwards for this guy, giving him chances, I have, trust me, giving him a lot of chances. We finally tried Vivitrol with him, and we saw big improvement, and he had a relapse, and we gave him one more shot at it. He got back, this was a really quick relapse. He got back on Vivitrol, and he went about 3 months. And he would come into court and say, when I get the shot, I'm sore, it's miserable. For a couple of days, I'm real moody, but the cravings are gone. So he did this for about 3 cycles, and then he just said, I'm not taking it anymore. I feel good. I think I'm better. I don't need Vivitrol anymore. I can do this on my own. And we warned him. We said, don't do this. Don't do this. You're going to be back in here. You need to stay on it. You're getting your life back together. And he didn't because he thought he had this. So I guess my point is Vivitrol can make people think they've got this and they don't need it anymore if they don't work the whole program the way it's supposed to be done. So 90 days wasn't enough for him, and he got off of it on his own, and he has failed once again and gone way off the tracks to the point where we just have to discharge him. We've given him too many breaks. So that's an unfortunate one, and that's one that I'm going to start from the very beginning preaching at my people in drug court is don't be like this guy, and I'll use him by name because they all know who he is, and don't get on this. And I'm sure tomorrow he's going to come into court and beg me, I'll get back on it, I'll stay on it this time, but we've already been down this path. So it does such a good job that some people say they've got this too soon when they really don't. So anyway, that's one, I guess, negative that we can probably fix through education.
I think a lot of people sort of equate Suboxone with methadone too, and sort of kind of lump those together, which is not very accurate for a couple different reasons. You know, one is, you know, not to get all geeky, you know, but methadone is a strong opiate. We use it because it's long acting, so it works over an extended period of time. And if something works over an extended period of time, and you don't have that peak, and you don't have that sort of really nice high, because it's really slow. So it releases a lot of chemical called dopamine. You know, Suboxone doesn't release that much dopamine, so it releases enough that you're not sick, but not so much that you're high. You know, and so they're both opiates, but they're very different. You know, the other aspect of it is, you know, methadone by law has to be done in a treatment center. You know, it's ironic. I mean, I can prescribe methadone for pain, but I can't prescribe methadone for opiate dependence. You know, and that's sort of where the law is. And so you've got these treatment centers that are rather large, and they come in at 5 o'clock, and they get dosed, and they pay their money, and that's not really what Suboxone really is about. You know, and so they passed this legislation called Data 2000 that sort of says, okay, now we can have primary care doctors, or any doctor that can sort of treat patients in their primary care setting, so they don't have to go to the treatment center anymore, to try to increase the physician workforce. And it was a great idea, and I find it very ironic that now I'm preaching this, let's bring everybody back together into one large center and do it all in one place, you know, en masse, you know, but, you know, the purpose behind it, again, is the ancillary services and just trying to create access with it. But they're just two very different medicines.
If I could just say one thing to your question about child welfare. Just the other day at the legislature, we had social work day at the legislature, and they were debating House Bill 2010, which is the foster care bill, the managed care, where they're going to give a $225 contract to some insurance company to manage foster care services in the state, which generally, you know, I'm like, no, that's probably not a good idea, but JEHWR is like, it doesn't matter if the legislature approves it or not, we're going to go ahead and do it, because that's within our purview. But there was a group of legislators up there, at least the word that I'm hearing from some, is that they want to lay claim to we're the ones who did something, so we're going to go ahead and make this like a political issue and have a vote on it and yada yada. But one of the provisions in that bill that I do agree with is that they will no longer allow judges by law to say, you know, remove custody because somebody's on MAT. So if that bill passes, then that is a provision that, you know.
Is that the only good thing about it?
That's the only good thing I could identify, but I don't know. I mean, I haven't read the 700-page contract.
No one else has either, so don't worry.
I am disappointed.
None of the people voting on it are ready, I promise that.
You mentioned one story about a parent bringing their children to these appointments. Have you found that with a lot of your patients that can sometimes be a conflict with completing the MAT program, such as being able to attend therapy sessions or not wanting their young children to know, or simply just not having that support? And if so, are there any resources that assist with child care so that parents can successfully complete the program?
Yes. You know, our policy is we will allow kids up to the age of 2 to either be in the group therapy or the individual therapy session. We find that, you know, at that point they're not picking up on the things that are being talked about and whatnot. It's one of many barriers, you know, to sort of getting treatment. You know, transportation, I think, is probably probably the number one barrier we have. You know, but I mean, I saw Mom today, and she's like, I can't come to this group anymore. I'm like, why can't you come? She's like, I have nobody to pick up my kid at 2:15 off the bus, and I don't get out of here until 3. I can't depend on anybody in my family to do it. I have to quit. And I said, don't quit. Let's move to a different group, and we'll find a way to make it work. So, I mean, it definitely does, create a barrier. Is anybody doing anything about it? Yes. There's an organization called Healthy Connections here in Huntington, and they are working diligently to try to identify a lot of different aspects, related to the kids with moms in treatment. But there's a huge void in medical research of what happens to these kids that we're treating at the hospital with methadone, in their long-term or their development. And so this organization is sort of starting to look at that and sort of get kids and get moms in databases and sort of start following outcomes over the long term so that we can start answering some of those questions. A lot of educators, are starting to sort of whisper, that these kids in kindergarten and first grade, that are sort of the first wave through, are having a lot of behavioral issues, and it's kind of a ADHD variant, and they get overstimulated easily, and once they're stimulated, then they sort of get fired up, and it's hard to keep them concentrated, hard to keep them on task, and sort of keep them controlled, sort of in the class with behavior. And so then we're throwing amphetamines at them to try to get them under control.
Related to what's going on in the clinic, rather than ADHD?
It's the nature-nurture. I mean, is it the medicines that they were exposed to in utero? Is it the medicines they were exposed to, that we had to wean them down, like after they were born and having withdrawal? Is it the environment that they're home, which is undoubtedly chaotic in of itself?
Dr. Hanson, have you thought about, these folks usually are drinking while they're drugging. And there's a whole body of knowledge out there about fetal alcohol effects.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand why I'm not hearing anyone speak about that. Because all the behaviors you express or identified are those behaviors of folks who are fetal alcohol affected.
I have probably at any given time 10 to 15 pregnant moms in my program.
Yep.
We test for alcohol.
But it's hard to test when it goes in so quickly.
I mean, with the screen that we utilize now, I mean, I pick up patients drinking even as 4, 5, 6 days before the drug screen. So the detection window has gotten a lot better as far as, because we're capturing metabolites from the alcohol that are still sort of present. So, I mean, alcohol definitely, I think it's a small issue. I don't think it's a large issue, sort of from my experience and sort of what I've seen, because I can't think of an example that I've over the last 9 years, I've probably 100, 150 moms that have sort of come through of an alcohol being an issue.
I've worked with folks up in Alaska.
Yeah.
And actually Indian Health Services did a lot of study on this.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of material out there about how to educate these children and work with their parents.
Yeah.
And it's a very, these are very good techniques
Yeah.
that have already been tried and true. They're evidence-based. And I never hear anybody really talking about that. But, alcohol really is the smaller molecule, right? To go in so quickly. And we know the damage it causes on the fetus. So I'm just thinking, I don't understand why nobody even really, maybe it's because you feel like you test well enough for it, and I don't know.
Yeah, I also treat one of 6 physicians that treats the babies, at Cabell. If you've seen one baby with NAS, you literally have seen one. Like, every baby is so unique.
Right.
It's so complicated, and what works with one baby doesn't work for the next. Because you've got moms that are using heroin, and they've got the fentanyl aspect of it. They're smoking like a freight train. We're seeing a resurgence of cocaine. We've got babies with methamphetamine. We've got seems like the literature is starting to show more and more, even SSRIs. We have moms, that about day 21, these babies are suddenly like previously controlled with their symptoms, and all of a sudden they're not controlled anymore, and it's very difficult to get them consoled again, and maybe there's this SRI, portion of it. There's so many factors, and if you talk with, I haven't talked to, but Sarah Murray is a great resource, and she's a nurse manager at the NTU, has talked to all these national experts around the country about NAS, and they say, what we do, you can't do, because your population is so much more complicated than anything we see. They're like, oh, we have our mom's room in. She's like, well, how many moms do you have at a given time? They're like, 3. We had 21, when I was on last week. It's a completely different world. And so I have no doubt that the things that they were doing in Alaska would be
Well,
great,
and Washington State,
yeah.
And the thing of it is, these techniques of working with children
Yeah.
are good with any group.
Yeah,
They're,
yeah.
so, but they've been found to be very effective with those children that are fetal alcohol affected or,
Yeah.
So yeah, I know there's a lot of material out there, but
Yeah.
gosh, they've been studying this since the 70s,
Yeah.
late 60s, I think. So I just was really curious as to why I never hear anybody bring that up. I hope people do start looking at it a little bit.
No, there's a collection of people that are sort of starting to study it, looking at it, and and trying to come up with some ideas. So it's just not something that I necessarily have my hand in right now.
Right. Thank you.
No problem.
Yes.
I'm here because I'm a reporter with the Gazette Mail in Charleston, and I'm just curious about how we've talked about stigma and the stigma that surrounds this still. How do you deal with that? And how do you see the different? I guess it seems like Calhoun County has done a kind of a better job of keeping its harm reduction services, and it's made less of a splash than it has in Charleston. How does that happen? What's the difference there?
I think it starts off with leadership. Not to knock the former mayor, or the leadership in Charleston. It's a different beast. But here in Huntington, we had 28 people overdose in the span of 4 hours. People are dying left and right. If you listen to Jan Radar, you've got fresh, firemen and EMS providers that are seeing dead body after dead body after dead body. Mayor Williams and sort of leadership in Huntington just said, this is horrible, and so we've got to do something, and no matter what it is, no idea is a bad idea. Let's talk about it, let's figure it out, and let's see what other places are doing it. And so, I don't know if it was out of desperation, or if they just had some, I'm not sure where it sort of came from, but something had to be done. And I think they were open to all options. And then, I think the right people got in the right places and set the programs up well. Dr. Phil Kinney at the health department has done a phenomenal job. He wasn't a big fan of it, honestly, in the beginning. I don't think he would openly tell you that, but he looked at the research, he did what he needed to do to set it up well, and then he got the buy-in from the people that needed to be bought in, with the support from Cabell Huntington Hospital.
I think it's important also that we kind of step back and reflect on because it wasn't easy going from the very beginning. There were a lot of people who were opposed to it. And if you ever read any of the comments on any of the news, stories online, you can see, kind of get a sense of how, people felt about it. And I do agree that it takes a recognition of the problem and, this is our reality and, we need to do something about this. But we also need to look at the resistance to the harm reduction movement and kind of say, told you so, And there's a lot more yet to be done on harm reduction. You know, harm reduction isn't just about 1 or 2 programs. And you know, you got to start small when people really don't understand what harm reduction is, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this. But you know, now that it's been successful in these certain programs, I think we need to look as a community at pushing further and further toward greater levels of harm reduction that include, you know, taking a look at our laws. You know, does it really make a lot of sense to put a youth who's smoking marijuana in prison or incarcerate that youth for smoking marijuana? Sure, marijuana is illegal, but maybe that kid is using marijuana because it's a coping mechanism to deal with a traumatic or very stress-induced life. But they will get caught up in the criminal justice system, which then, you know, if there isn't the appropriate rehabilitative programming, the therapeutic aspect, if it's not there, and if we just demand people change their behaviors because the judge tells you to, you know, I mean, that's not a realistic, and I'm not saying that you take that approach, but I'm just saying the authority of the robe is one thing, okay, but when you have somebody who has just steeped in trauma and layers of chronic stress, the judge telling them to do something, especially a kid, it's not going to be, he's not going to do it because you say so. You know, unfortunately, even when everybody in the room's rooting for him to go, please, just please do it. Would you just please do what the judge tells you to do? So the harm reduction aspect of it, I think we need to step back, reflect on the resistance, see initially where that resistance was wrong, how harm reduction has helped us to this point, and then be courageous and push it a little further, which will require people to, you know, be okay with a little bit of uncertainty and experiment within the gray area and maybe be wrong a little bit and open themselves up to some public scrutiny, which has already happened. So
I would agree. I don't want to add a lot to that because you said that very well. Numbers don't lie. I mean, Dr. Hansen laid out some of the numbers, 40% reduction, I mean, things like that. And you can sit and squabble and everybody's got an opinion on things, but when the research says something and the research says, hey, this is helping, that's the way that we should go. Dr. White, you mentioned morals earlier. When something says, hey, this works, morally, it's our job to do what works. I mean, at the end of the day, that is our job, is to protect citizens of this community and to help citizens of this community. And we're willing to sit back, and I'm not picking on Charleston. I'm not from Charleston. I'm not picking on Charleston. But when you're willing to allow other things to get into the way of what works, that's problematic. And I know I applaud a lot of people in this region, in this area, in Huntington specifically, who say, hey, yeah, you're going to hate me for this, but this works, so I'm going to do it. So, yeah.
What does the criminal research say about MAT treatments? Has there been much research into crime statistics and things surrounding MAT?
And almost the vast majority of it is positive. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of research that shows that individuals who go through MAT programs, now not just MAT, I mean MAT is always paired with other things, it's not just by itself. The recidivism rates are lower. Issues that they have long-term seem to be less, not only with just recidivism rates, but just finding a job, social issues like that. So the majority of the literature, and I can provide some of this to you if you'd like to have, shows that MAT is a positive part within harm reduction. Again, like we have in all fields, I think they have this habit, we say like harm reduction, and it's just this big blanket umbrella term. There's a lot of things that go into harm reduction. And MAT is just a part or a tool that we can use within harm reduction.
in Charleston's defense, you know, it is a needle exchange program.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that was necessarily happening, you know, where you get a needle, give a needle, like a fair exchange. And when you have people going into, you know, first responders going into buildings and they're being stuck with needles, or they walk in at a playground or wherever they might be called to, and there's a ton of needles that they have to look out for. I mean, we got to think about everybody's safety when we're talking about harm reduction. So, and I think help me with this, I don't know, but it seems like here in Cabell County, like they started being a little bit more just restrictive on, like as a result of what was going on in Charleston. And hey, like if you have 20 needles, and if you want 20 needles, and I don't even know if they get out 20, probably not 20 needles at a time. But if you want needles, then you have to give needles in exchange. We're not just going to keep flooding the community with needles.
The last statistic that I heard Dr. Kilkenny mention was 113%. So they collect more needles than they give out recently. So it's like they're literally taking needles off the streets that would be on the playground or on the street or wherever. Now, how they got there, I don't know. But but that's the potential.
When you were talking about harm reduction has to do with the entire community to some degree. You can look at HIV rates, you can have C rates, you can look at all these different kinds of rates of illnesses and things like that that have all gone down. They continue to go down. And again, if it works, doesn't really matter what our opinion is, we should probably do what's best for the most people. This is why I'm not a politician.
Lee, you mentioned that, even though it's been said that you have to be able to accept MPT, that people are so resistant to it, especially older judges who have been practicing for longer. Have you been able to help them change their minds or provide like an avenue for a conversation? And like, if so, like what has that looked like, changing minds in the JEHworld specifically where there might be more resistance?
Yeah, I mean, just walking the halls at the courthouse and talking with the other circuit judges who were a little older, in the last few months, we've had this discussion on a number of occasions. And just kind of reiterating and reinforcing amongst all of our colleagues that this is kind of a new trend. This is something we need to be working for. And I think, I've only been on the bench for 2 years, but in that amount of time, I've seen a shift. I don't know that 2 years ago I could have told you what MAT stood for, honestly. I knew Suboxone, I knew methadone, I knew some of those terms, but this is so new in our field as far as the acronyms and how we're using it and how we're rolling it out in these programs. It is all literally evolving monthly. So their perspectives of the older judges are changing. There's obviously some newer, younger judges coming on who I think are already on board with that type of thing. Again, I don't want to make it sound like we're pushing that on everybody, because our preference, and we even discussed this in our meeting the other day, PROACT, our preference is still abstinence. And we want to try to still work as many people, just using drug court as a small microcosm of 50 people. I don't want a drug court probably of 50 people that are all on MAT. There is no one-size-fits-all. I'm hopeful that we'll have at least half of our participants or more that are still abstinence-based. But every, and I tell this to our participants all the time, don't look at your neighbor and say, well, you didn't put him in jail because of this, or you didn't do this because, you should treat me like him. Every single one of these people are different. They all need our attention specifically to what their issues are. A lot of co-occurring disorders, a lot of trauma in childhood, a lot of it's sexual trauma, and we have to look at all the different layers of the person and decide what is the best thing for them. And there is no one-size-fits-all MAT either, obviously. We have to figure out what's the best one for them. I've got one guy in drug court. He's an older guy. Well, I say older, he's in his 50s. And I know, it's old. But his problem was alcohol. And that's kind of a rare, refreshing thing for us, because almost everybody is heroin. But we put him on Vivitrol, and he's been doing pretty well. And he came into court this week and had relapsed. He'd gone over to a friend's house, he was working on their wheelchair, he was helping them out, and they put a beer in front of him, and he drank it. And first relapse he's had in months. And he said he just looked beat down. He was in front of me, he was up there in front of the whole drug court. He had written me a 2-page letter about how bad he felt about it. But what I thought was interesting, and I didn't put him in jail or anything for that, obviously, but what I thought was interesting about it was he got sick as a dog from it. He drank a beer and a half, and he was sick for all weekend. Felt horrible, felt like he had the flu. He said he just had all kinds of problems, headaches. He still had a headache. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's the first personal experience I've heard from a participant who's on it, who violated it, and who got an instant reaction. That's worth more than me putting somebody in jail for 72 hours. So he's learned that when he's on this, it's not worth it to drink a beer or two because the consequences afterwards aren't. And he didn't get a buzz off of it. So that was kind of neat to me. So it's very unique, very individual driven.
That's one of the things I would say is one of the silver lining. I mean, if there's a silver lining to, being the opioid overdose capital of the country, probably not anymore with those rates. But if there's a silver lining, I think that's what it would be, is the beginning to hone in on the individual and trying systems, criminal justice system, medical system, educational system, hopefully at some point, like really focusing in on the needs of the individual and as a part of meeting people where they are. And if I could just share a couple quotes direct from the doctors. Dr. Marshalik is a psychiatrist at WVU's Behavioral Health Center, and I interviewed him. He said doctors show they care, because he said if you don't show you care, your patients won't. The change pivots on that. And if you don't have that relationship with them, then chances are the change will either not occur, it'll be superficial, it'll be just kind of like transitory. Like, yes, when I see you, I pretend to change, but I'm not really going to change. So he says, doctors show they care through a willingness to individualize care, meaning when patients break program rules or present with a positive drug screen, the automatic response to those infractions should not be to kick them out of the program. Sometimes you have to tweak the rules to individualize the treatment for patients. And Dr. Hansen said something very similar. He said individualizing the treatment means doctors take the time to understand that each patient has unique issues to work through, custody issues, pain issues, pregnancy, comorbidity in psychiatry, relationship issues. It's never clear cut. So to me, that's a silver lining, is the change in perspective that we're seeing in professionals across disciplines.
Other questions?
Do you feel, we've talked a lot about the stigma that MAT may have, as well as SPOC centers and other methods of treatment. Do you feel like, a question that came up at my work recently was, how do you wean people off of this medication? Do you feel like through MAT that's an effective way by treating these other areas of concern? That's a way of holistically treating that person, and if we could advocate and educate on that we could get more providers on board.
I've said many times, I feel like my job is relatively easy. I have a tool, I give it to the patient, they're not sick, my job's done. Like, you're not sick anymore, you're not withdrawing, then go see the therapist and fix all the other issues. The problem is so many of these patients, are 20, 30 years of substance abuse, or, which is even probably more prevalent, is they started at 11, 12, 13, 14. And I don't know if the literature ever supports it. I really think that maturity stops when you become an addict. And so, I've got a lot of 35-year-old patients that have the mentality of a 13-year-old, and they're bickering in their relationships, they can't take care of their kids, they want to quit every job that they get. If you say anything bad about it, they just get all defensive. like dealing with a bunch of teenagers sometimes. So from a physical standpoint, weeding them off, can happen, but unfortunately, I mean, the success rate for patients that are weaned off that lead to relapse is way higher than what any of us would like it to be. And that's just unfortunate. It makes me sad, honestly, but that's just sort of the reality, because it's so hard to bring that 12-year-old up to a 22-year-old or to overcome 30 years of use and abuse. And when I first started, I mean, I was pumped. I'm going to get them clean, I'm going to therapize them, and I'm going to wean them off and get them out of here. And I'm going to bring in a new batch, and I'm going to revolutionize Huntington. And unfortunately, that just didn't happen. But
I think
along the way, though, I mean, what I realized is I'm saving lives. So maybe this person doesn't ever get off Suboxone. Hopefully they're working. Hopefully they're taking care of their kids. They're not getting Narcan. There's small to large victories that take place anyways. I wish. I love Recovery Point. I love Recovery Point. I love what they do. I love absence-based. I am absence-based first, MAT second. And that's the reality, and that's strange. And I always say, I'm trained to use medicines. You come with me a problem, I'm going to give you medicine to fix it. But that's not the way we need to be. That's how we got into this problem. But, the thing I love about Recovery Point is you just, in the drug courts, like if you can buy in and dig into these patients and just get them to change. It's hard for me to get patients to change with an hour and a half of contact a week. It's just hard. It really, really is. I wish I had a way to make them do 90 meetings in 90 days. I wish I could get them 10 hours of class every week, and really just pour into them. But it's hard. And I'm going off on a tangent. I don't know where I'm going. But yeah, I mean, we would love, but I mean, the literature is not there really to support weaning. And so you've got to sort of pick and choose. That's where my job does get harder, is picking and choosing who I need to push to wean down and who I need to just accept that this is the best it's going to get, and we got to leave them there. That gets harder. That's a harder portion of it.
And I'll say this, wean now to me is one of those four-letter words that I don't use anymore.
Yeah.
I went through, I know I've said it before already, but I went through probably 15 years of practice of listening to judges say to me, wean your client down, wean your client off. And it's just not practical, it's not right, it's not something that I as a lawyer could do. I mean, I'm sitting in my conference room with moms telling them, you have to wean off of this or you're going to lose your child. They're bawling, and it's just a terrible scenario. I haven't said the word wean in 2 years, and I don't anticipate I'm ever going to say it again after tonight, because I just rely on people like Dr. Hansen. We've got the doctors here that understand it now, and he puts them on it, I let it go. And I work with it, and we provide the support we need. I'm not going to tell somebody they have to wean off. So, I've heard it as compared to other medications. You put people on medication for some other physical issue, they shouldn't come to court and I say, you're going to have to wean off of your kidney medication, So I'm not going to make them wean off of some other medication that they've been accurately assessed for and they're on it and they're doing well. So that's my position on it. And I think it's becoming more prevalent in the judiciary.
And just from a sociological perspective, maybe this isn't the best thing, right? Maybe absence may be the best thing we want there, but would we rather have someone dealing with these other issues in an unhealthy way that we talked about, or would we rather have them on their medication for a long period of time and actually being able to improve their life? That's, I mean, from thinking about a societal issue, would I rather pay a little bit extra tax money to help with healthcare and things like that, or would I rather pay tax money to put someone in a jail or a prison? Where does that really mean? And where does, again, that morality kind of spectrum come into play there?
One of the themes that arose frequently from the 6 interviews I did was the diabetes metaphor. All of the doctors made some allusion to a comparison to to addiction with diabetes, especially as we talk about like the moralism of it, you know, addiction is a moral failing. Just if you guys would humor me here, just to share some of the quotes. You know, and the behavioral aspect of it. Well, it's a choice. It's a choice. It's a choice. Again, Dr. Marshalik says that with type 2 diabetes, patients start on a path. Yeah, it's a question. They start on a path with some decisions, right? He further elaborates on the role of behavior in chronic disease and the double standards that exist in healthcare when a moralistic view is applied to certain conditions. This is a direct quote. Behavior can be part of addiction and a large part of other conditions. How many times do we put stents in people that smoke 2 packs a day, eat a horrible diet, haven't managed their hypertension? No one says, don't put another stent in that person. We continue to lob off people's limbs after diabetes runs rampant. And Dr. Berry, also at WVU, noted that, you know, sometimes we want to take that whole frustration takes over and we can't understand why people just don't do what we tell them to do. Dr. Berry quotes, doctors get frustrated when people don't take their recommendations, but usually those are the sickest of the sick. So they're using this comparison with diabetes to try to get over the moralism hump. And there's a physician, the director of the Center of Medical Excellence, or I can't remember what it's called, Dr. Andrew Saxon, Medical Director, Center of Excellence for the Treatment of Substance Use at the VA in Puget Sound. He's suggesting to get around to reduce stigma by no longer calling it MAT. It's just treatment. You know, it's like your hypertension medication isn't MAT. Your diabetes medication isn't MAT. It's just your medicine, your treatment, you know. But this MAT label that we're putting on, and maybe just because we don't have any other way of describing it at this point, but it's something to think about, you know, when we categorize it as it.
And I think that touches on a larger point in society around the idea of addiction and treatment in general. We have this habit and this inclination to always say, well, you chose this. This is all on you. And now we can debate the personal choice of drug use. So I'm not debating that part. But we also can't deny and ignore all these other structural factors that may have played into that decision. There's something called Appalachian fatalism that we can talk about in this realm. And by just looking at this, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality completely, it's a way of kind of absolving ourselves from, as societally, absolving ourselves from, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It's their fault, not our fault. And that's something that we have to talk about when we talk about stigma. Because a lot of that stigma comes from that mentality of, well, you did this to yourself. And that's something that we always have to address when we talk about this.
Sometimes they did it to themselves. Sometimes they definitely didn't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of patients that walk through our doors that have 100% failed by the medical community. Overprescribed horribly. You know, and those break my heart, you know, because this is my crew, this is my peeps. These are the people who are supposed to take care of people, and we messed them up. We destroyed their lives, you know, and they trusted us and we failed them to some extent.
But it's not just the medical community. I think you can take a step back and say it's American culture that drives that pushes that, the medical response kind of to all ailments rather than catching the reactionary response rather than the preventive response or, preventive approach to a lot of these chronic, not just addiction, but other chronic illnesses as well.
Well, even in this region, Appalachia, I don't know how many of you come from coal mining backgrounds, but it was very normal back in the days of coal camps that the coal miner's job, all they cared about was you working. They didn't care if your hand was broken or so you got hurt. They just said, "Here, take these." And this is not. We talk about the open up different things like this, like it's the
wonder if we didn't have such massive deaths, you know, if we would really be looking at this now. If those people hadn't have died in a big hunk, would we be doing this?
I think we'd be doing it. I don't think we would be doing it as effectively because
Yeah.
that spotlight brought money, and then money created programs. You know, and Dr. Young and I were talking, you know, before we started. You know, and I mean, Huntington very deliberately is trying to change that conversation from the overdose capital to the recovery capital. And so I had a patient, you know, presented today to the office. And I'm talking to her, taking her history, and I'm like, where are you from? She's like, I'm from St. Louis. Well, how'd you end up in Huntington from St. Louis? And I'm thinking, no, she's going to say family. It's like, no, I don't know anybody in Huntington. I was in a recovery center in St. Louis, and I walked out, and a local church sort of took me under their wing, and they bought me a plane ticket and sent me to Huntington.
Wow.
I'm like, what? Like, seriously? I'm thinking, you know, put all your homeless on the bus and send them down the road. Like, what? I'm like, why? She said, this is the recovery capital. She said they felt that we had the resources here to be able to treat her. I'm like, well, awesome. I mean, I can't say that I've been that happy to hear, like, those words were just amazing to me. I mean, it made me so happy.
That's
You
great.
know, now, who in St. Louis at some church, you know, made that connection, I don't know. But I talked with a couple of my staff, and she's not the first one. We've had 2 or 3 people that have come from St. Louis, you know, similar type things. Crazy.
People from all over the world are doing stories on the drug court ever since the Netflix thing. We had a crew in a few months ago from Japan that did a story on us. We've had folks over from England, and next week we have a film crew coming in from Italy. So it's drawn so much attention. But really, when the heroin Netflix documentary came out, that's where all these worldwide news agencies, PBS type places from around the world grabbed onto that. And so they all come here to do stories on our drug court. And so, like Dr. Hansen said, all of that spotlight has brought in a lot of money and resources, and so we're kind of reaping the benefit of that. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to rain on the parade or anything, because Huntington is doing a fantastic job for the most part. Everyone is using the services that we can provide. But when we look at this issue regionally, we look at this issue nationally, there are still a lot of people that are not getting the resources, especially people of color who have been kind of just left out of this conversation when it comes to opioid arguments. So there is still a lot of issues with people here. We're able to provide the resources, and that's fantastic. But nationally, it's not the same conversation for everybody. And that's something that has to be, I don't know if my liberalism or what caused that, but that has to be stated.
Kind of along your first question you asked, real short side note, we're working, is for what Dr. Hayes was talking about earlier. And I think what makes Cal County and Huntington unlike anywhere else in the nation is that we are really good team players. I think somebody mentioned morals, like let's lay our morals aside and figure out what we can do and put our roots on the ground to do it. We're so cohesive, I think, among HB. Treatment providers, we're certainly comprehensive, drug court, proactive Valley Health have been working weight in gold as far as us, getting people in. There's this continuity of care.
The conversation had to happen.
Right. So we start with a conversation, we branched out, and I think we just work really, really well together. And I think that's why our numbers are down 40%. There's so much in our community that somebody with substance disorder can choose from. It's like an Oprah giveaway out there. It's like, what do you like? Where do you want to go? What do you need? Let's get you there. And there's this continuity of care to make sure that we don't just stop at detox. We make sure you get the therapy. We make sure that the whole person is taken care of. And I think none of that would be possible if it weren't for people like on the panel, people like us in this room, and
One of the things that I think that has
debilitating for the whole city. They started working together, the salary, and each agency had their own agenda and everything. And when they come together, it made a big difference in our city as well. So that is commendable when people put their egos aside and say, okay, we're all going to work together. It's not just about me and being recognized, but just saying we're going to work on this problem. Yeah, makes a big difference.
Other questions?
I just think it's remarkable that you pulled this panel together. I mean, you will talk about integration. It's really, it's remarkable. We have a criminologist up there that's sitting with a social worker. I mean,
I want to clear the air on something here. Not all criminologists are what you think they are.
I know. I work with you. No, but it's wonderful that everyone's working together to make this problem cease to exist. That's the idea, right? We want that to cease.
Yeah, and I think we need to be able to hear everybody's reality. You know, like I'm not in drug court every day, seeing people who, let's be honest, can be very difficult, I'm sure, and very frustrating at times. I'm not ensconced in that. I'm here at the university reading books and, you know, writing things and interviewing doctors who also have a position of a little bit of privilege in this, you know. So, you know, I have to be able to hear that my view of the way things should be doesn't necessarily fit all the time with the way things are. And so I have to be willing to work within the system and building relationships and hoping to get along and gradually make the necessary change from within alongside the people who are in that system all the time doing the very best that they possibly can. And on the flip side of that, the people who are in that system, I think, need to be open to hearing about what are the possibilities, what is working in other places. That might sound crazy to us, but if it's working and people are getting better and not dying and it's saving the state right now is like, it's like $8.8 billion this drug epidemic. It's like 12% of our GDP, which is way higher than most other states. You know, it's costing us a lot of money. So everybody has to be willing to know what they know, but also what they don't know, and be open to navigating that alongside others.
And part of that is having the tough conversations too. I mean, we're going to disagree. I mean, we're human beings, we disagree anyway. But sometimes we have to have those tough conversations, have those disagreements, and really work through those disagreements. And as a part of working through those disagreements, not separate ourselves back out. We have to continue to keep that collective idea of working on this together. I mean, to some degree, this community in this sense is almost familial. And families fight, families disagree about stuff, but at the end of the day, you want everything to work. You have to kind of make it work as a unit. So.
Other questions?
I want to sort of just throw out one sort of something to think a little bit about, you know, and we were looking through what some of the questions were going to be, and the question was sort of the moral failure, drug for drug sort of thing. You know, and this is something I think I learned sort of really relatively early on, you know, as I started sort of program of treatment. You know, if you think of sort of your worst physical illness, whether it was a horrible case of the flu, or you had a GI bug that just tore you up, or a kidney stone, or a broken bone, or whatever it may be, and you think through what was it that helped you get through that thing? Was it Zofran for the nausea? Was it some pain medicine for the broken ankle? Was it some Tylenol for the flu? You took that and it made you feel better. And so when you look at these individuals that that are dependent on this medicine, and you say you should just stop. Well, next time you're that sick, you don't take that medicine. It's going to make you feel better. Because you should just suck it up and be sick and just get through it without using the thing that will make you feel better. Most of these patients are using to keep from being sick. The high is long gone. They're not trying to get high anymore. They just don't want to be crapping themselves in the Kroger's parking lot when they're trying to get some milk for their kid. It's the way it's just a completely different way of thinking about it, in my mind. And it sort of shocked me once I realized what their intentions were. And it makes me a little less judgmental of them. When somebody comes in and they've used it, I always say, well, what were the circumstances behind it? Did you just feel like getting high? And rarely that's the answer. Usually it's, my wife threw me out, and I haven't seen my kids in 3 days, and the only place I could go was my buddy's house, and my buddy does meth, and so I did meth. Like, there's always something else, it really is not a moral failure.
I've heard people say repeatedly, I'm not using to get high anymore,
Yeah.
I'm using to get well.
Yeah.
And that's just a logical idea. Like, we know that addiction leads to these horrible outcomes, can lead to these horrible outcomes, but no one goes into it like, I want to ruin my life. Yeah, well, it's not the reason they get into it. That's not a driving force for why they do these things. And that argument, I think, too, of switching one drug for another drug kind of doesn't take that into consideration. I don't think that's the idea. So these are still human beings, and human beings still have problems and have issues, and then just to throw away something like that is very problematic.
If I could just read a couple more quotes from a couple of the doctors that I haven't mentioned yet. Dr. Kelly Cummings over at Cabell, she works with the pregnant women. She was very matter of fact about her job. She's like, I'm a doctor, I treat disease. I have no problem prescribing medication to pregnant women because I don't want them out prostituting. I don't want them out using contaminated needles. I want them to be able to keep their children in their custody. And she made like absolutely no bones about it. She said, I was raised on prescribing. Dr. Chafin is her mentor, and she was just I was trying to get some, just some sort of like, is there any conflict in there at all about, what she's doing? And there's just not. But one thing she did say that I think we also have to try to remember is she said these patients have been hurt by a lot of people. They don't trust easily. So when we demand that they trust us, or we expect that they trust us because we hold a position, or because we say we're here to help, it's going to take a major investment in time, energy with that individual to really be able to establish that connection. And then Dr. Christensen, who's also over at Cabell, and he's faculty at the med school. He advocates a lot for observing clients and like really reading between the lines when the patients come in, which is something maybe a lot of people aren't trained to do. He said because sometimes patients do not volunteer information or they are vague about their reasons for the visit. For example, patients may say things like, hey, this doctor told me to come and talk to you. And Dr. Christensen said he responds by asking, well, what do you want to talk about? All the while kind of knowing really what they're there. He said when he shows interest, he eases the patient into the conversation and makes sure that that patient understands, this is a direct quote, if you're asking for help, it is my privilege to be able to help you. It's not a burden on me. Which gave me some big goosebumps when he said that. Because I really think that is the approach that we should be taking, and that is the view of the folks that we're here to help. And then finally, Dr. Knapp, just talking about the pressure of seeing a lot of people. You got 10 patients that you got to see in an hour. says, there's a lot of pressure to just kind of move through the patients, but he said that pressure pales in comparison to the high stakes for the patient with substance use disorder. He cautions, you may have 20 patients to see, but for that one person in your office, this might be their life and death visit. And that's a powerfully stated reality that really begs for doctors' attention and willingness to connect with their patients.
Do we have any other questions?